All right. Happy Sabbath.
Happy Sabbath.
Good to be back with you all. Back into the series we've been doing on understanding the Bible. Today we're coming into the book of Esther. All right. So this is basically in with where we've been in the last couple, time-wise. This one I have in here circa 486 to 465 in BC. If you notice here, I throw in a question mark with this because there's some question about whose reign they're discussing here, exactly who this Ahasuerus is. That's mentioned in the first chapter and, well, throughout here. Who is this one who becomes Esther's husband? In this concept, which is the main idea I've seen being put forth from scholarship, this 486 to 465 BC, this is identifying Ahasuerus as Xerxes the First, who is the grandson of Cyrus. Cyrus who made the decree for them to be released. So this here is taking time, taking place during the banishment of Israel, when some are starting to come home. So this is somewhere in between the place when the first wave went home with Zerubbabel and before Ezra and his wave came home and was doing their things. All right. I have here for the concept, the overall look at the book is God rules behind the scenes. And I have this here. This is what I would like us to focus on in this book, because this is one of the book, again, with scholarship. I don't always agree with scholarship in certain ways, because a lot of them would look at this and say, this seems to be like a secular book in the canon. And they say that because this is the one book that does not mention God. God is not mentioned in the book of Esther. And some will take it further and say, well, look, it's never quoted in the New Testament. Or to say, hey, the 1947 fine down there at the Dead Sea, the Dead Sea Scrolls, they don't find the book of Esther. They find the other books. And so some scholarship begins to question this stuff. Why is this here? What is this point of this book? But I think insight as to how God rules behind the scenes, even when he's not necessarily fully acknowledged in what's being said. So this, as I said here, it's one of the post-exilic writings. We just wrapped up Ezra and Nehemiah. We looked at 1st and 2nd Chronicles. So this is dealing with the times where they're just coming back from their 70 years in Babylon. People have a tendency to think everyone came home at that time. They didn't. There were some who remained in Babylon, or within this realm of this Persian Empire. We even see later in the New Testament where Peter is writing to strangers at Babylon. People say, oh, that's talking about code word from Rome. No, there's nothing in the scriptures that tells us that's a code word from Rome. That's a concept of a later idea, but there is still dispersed Jews who were living at Babylon and other areas where they have been dispersed. We even see that question come up during the Gospels. Oh, where's he going to go? What a question about Jesus. Is he going to go to the dispersed? So they know not everyone was back home in the land. In this case here, we're looking at the Jews living in Persia. All right. You may not know who Persia is or where Persia is. Persia, we know today, is Iran. Right? But it was a greater empire, a vast empire at this point in history. Esther, by the way, is we'll come to read in the book, that is not her given name. Her given name is Hadassah. Esther is a Persian name that she took, and it means hidden. Because we'll see, originally she was hiding her ethnicity that she was a Jewess, um, amongst other things here. So, and also God's kind of hidden in this book because it's not outright mentioning him, but we do see God's hand at work. The key verse, Esther 4:13 to 14, I'd say would be a key verse in this book that stands out to me. Mordecai commanded to answer Esther, said, don't think to yourself that you're going to be able to escape in the king's house more than all the Jews. Because there was a decree, and we'll get into this text. There's not a whole lot of text of Esther today, so there's going to be a little bit more of a, it ain't going to be like a 20,000 foot view. We're going to come in and read the text of Esther essentially and look what the story's telling us here. So there's a decree to kill all the Jews, and so Mordecai is telling Esther, whom he raised, say, don't think this because you have this position now in the kingdom that you're in the king's house that you're going to be escaping what's happening. And he said, if you all together hold your peace at this time, there shall be enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will be destroyed. And who knows where you are come to the kingdom for such a time as this. So Mordecai's given a glimpse of God behind the scenes. Did God give you the beauty that you have that won you that position to be queen? You won the beauty pageant. You're Miss Persia. You won it. Did God do this, set this up so you could be in such a place that you are now to be able to help your people? And so this is the main concept this is key to me to this book, because it gives an insight again of God working behind the scenes, though he's not mentioned. So this is a quick overview of the book. We begin, we're introduced to Ahasuerus and his queen, Vashti. And so we first read of Queen Vashti being deposed. We go into chapter 2, 1 through 18, with Esther becoming queen. 2:19 to 23, we see the king's life is saved because there's people who threaten the life of the king, and Mordecai gives warning and gets the king's life saved. We're introduced then to Haman, who was raised up. Haman's an Agagite, and Haman's a hater of the Jews. He's Miso-Judaic. Chapter 4, we get Mordecai's request. Chapter 5, 1 to 8, we see Esther step up. And chapter 9 to 14, we get Haman puffed up. Haman was already puffed up, but even all the more so here. Chapter 6, tables turn. It's kind of like the pivot in the story. Chapter 7, 1 through 8:17. So basically, chapter 7 and 8, Haman's plot to destroy all the Jews is uncovered, and a new decree comes forth from the king. And chapter 9, the Jews celebrate as they're, through the decree, they're given the ability to defend themselves, and not only defend, but go off and take out the people who are going to come against them. And then chapter 10, just a couple of verses referencing Mordecai's honor. This is one of the books, or this book here in particular is also introduces us to why the feast of Purim exists, Purim, that this occurred in the last biblical month, in the month of Adar. This is the story about what led to Purim. Purim's not in Leviticus 23. It's not a God-commanded feast, but it's a feast that Israel remembers of God's provision behind the scenes for their salvation. Yeah, it's a feast they created that God honored. So we'll dig into chapter 1 here. It came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus, this Ahasuerus, which reigned from India even to Ethiopia, over 127 provinces. Like I said, they had a vast empire. I have not got to dig entirely deep in this. I know several years ago I tried to look into who's Ahasuerus. Artaxerxes, Darius, how do all these people interrelate? There's question of Ahasuerus is not so much as given name as it is a title, like it's the Caesar of Persia. Artaxerxes ties in with this. Ahasuerus. As I said, most scholarship today tends to identify this Ahasuerus as Xerxes the First. I've read on that with some ancient historians like Herodotus talking about Xerxes the First and what he was, what his vast empire was, how he had a palace at Shushan, and his appetite for women and being a drunk, and all these things that fit this story of this Ahasuerus here in the book of Esther. So, in those days, when King Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan, also known as Susa, the palace, in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast unto all his princes and his servants, the power of Persia and Media, the nobles and princes of the provinces being before him. When he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the honor of his excellent majesty many days, even 180 days. Talk about a party. This is half a year. He's having a party and showing off all his blessings, all that he has. And when those days were expired, the king, hey, party's over, but now time for the after party. And he makes a feast of 7 days here. He says it makes a feast for all the people that are present in Shushan the palace, to the great and small, 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace, which were white and green and blue hangings, fastened with cords of fine linen and purple to silver rings and pillars of marble, and the beds of gold and silver upon a pavement of red and blue and white and black marble. And they gave them drink in vessels of gold, the vessels being diverse from one another, in royal wine in abundance, according to the state of the king. So they're showing how opulent this was, the party, and how much the king lived in opulence. And he says then that so the drinking was according to the law, and none did compel. For so the king had appointed all officers of his house that they should do according to every man's pleasure. And Vashti the queen made a feast for women in the royal house, which belonged to King Ahasuerus. The 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, it means he was pretty drunk, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abagtha, Zethar, and Carcas, the 7 chamberlains that served in the presence of Ahasuerus, the king, to bring Vashti, the queen, before the king with her royal crown, to show the people and the princes her beauty, because she was fair to look upon. So again, you see this guy is constantly trying to show off. Look at my beautiful palace. Look at my beautiful hangings and tapestries that I have. Look at my beautiful gold cups that I'm giving you this great wine in. Now you guys think you saw everything great? Wait till you see my wife. And he wants to show off his wife. And so he sends his 7 chamberlains to go get her. But Vashti refused to come at the king's command. The chamberlains came and she said, ain't happening. Therefore, the king was very wroth, and his anger burned in him. The king said to the wise men, which knew the times, for so was the king's manner towards all who knew the law and judgment. And the next unto him was Karshena, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marsena, and Memucan, the 7 princes of Persia and Media, who saw the king's face, and which sat first in the kingdom. And they said, what shall we do with the queen Vashti according to the law? Because she has not performed the commandment of the king Ahasuerus by the chamberlains. And Memucan answered before the king and the princes, Vashti the queen has not done wrong to the king only, but to all the princes and to all the people that are in the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For this deed of the queen shall come abroad unto all women, so that they shall despise their husbands in their eyes when it's reported what she did. So King Ahasuerus commanded Vashti the queen to be brought in before him, and she came not. Likewise shall the ladies of Persia and Media say to this day to all the king's princes which have heard of this deed of the queen, thus shall arise too much contempt and wrath. So if it please the king, let there go a royal commandment from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes that it be not altered, because this was the way of the Medes and the Persians. So the decree went out. It was not changeable. There wasn't amendments to their constitution. There's a decree. Here's what it is. And so he says, they said, put this in the law. And they said that Vashti no more comes before King Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal estate to another that's better than she. A better man than you, right? And when the king's decree, which he shall make, shall be published throughout all his empire, for it is great, all the wife shall give to their husbands honor, both to great and to small. And the saying pleased the king and the princes, and the king did according to the word of Memucan. And he sent letters to all the king's provinces, unto every province according to the writing thereof, and to every people after the language, that every man should bear rule in his own house, and it should be published according to the language of every people. So they made it law here, like, hey, man's head. Women, you better be subject, or look what happened to Vashti. Because Queen Vashti got deposed, and she got separated, for she was no longer able to come to the king. Stepping out of our culture here, because we have a tendency to think of king and queen and husband and wife. We have the concept husband and wife share a home, share a room, share a bed. This wasn't the case with here. King had a harem, and queen came to the king whenever he called for the queen to come to the king. So it was a different culture, a different manner of how things were. So as Vashti is deposed and put away to just remain in her chamber and not be able to be before the king anymore, there arises decreed against her. And then said the king's servants that ministered to him, let there be fair young virgins sought for the king. And so the king, let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather all the fair young virgins under Shushan the palace, to the house of the women, under the custody of Hoeck, the king's chamberlain, the keeper of the women. And let their things for purification be given them, and let the maiden which pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. Now the queen, while the king had a harem, the queen did have some political power in this kingdom, so it's different from the rest of the harem. So they're concerned with who he has for queen as well. So the thing pleased king, and he did so. And in Shushan in the palace there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai. He was the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish. He was a Benjamite. All right. He had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captivity, which had been carried away with Jeconiah, the king of Judah. Remember this? We read about this back in Chronicles, what happened. And so Mordecai is one of the ones who was carried in the captivity through, and whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. He brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother, and the maid was fair and beautiful, whom Mordecai, when her father and mother were dead, took for his own daughter. So Esther is Mordecai's uncle's daughter. So it's a cousin of his that he took in to be father to, because her parents were both dead. So it came to pass, when the king's commandment in his decree was heard that many maidens were gathered together unto Shushan the palace to the custody of Haggai. That Esther was brought in also to the king's house to the custody of Haggai, the keeper of women. And the maiden pleased him, and she obtained kindness of him, and he speedily gave her her things for purification, with such things as belonged to her, and 7 maidens, which were suitable to be given to her out of the king's house. And he preferred her and her maids unto the best place in the house of women. So again, we're seeing God granting her favor. So even with the guy who's in charge of her and getting her ready for the king, he already has a heart for her and elevates her to have the best room in the house of women and has the best set of people to work with. And he was quick to give her the things that she needs, because these women go through a year-long beautification process. And so he was making sure to attend to her needs. Now, Esther, as I remember, I said Esther is hidden. She did not show her people nor her kindred. She wasn't saying that she was a Jew or such, because Mordecai had charged her that she should not show it. Don't give your background. And Mordecai walked every day before the court of the women's house to know how Esther did and what should become of her. And when every maid's turn was come to go to King Ahasuerus, after that she had been 12 months according to the manner of women, for so were the days of their purification accomplished, to wit, 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with sweet odors, and with other things for the purifying of the women. Thus came every maiden unto the king. Whatsoever she desired was given unto her to go with her out of the house of the women unto the king's house. In the evening she went, and on the morrow she returned into the second house of women to the custody of Shaashgaz, the king's chamberlain, which kept the concubines. She came into the king no more, except if the king delighted in her, and that she were called by name. So essentially, he's gathered these young virgin women, got them prepped, and then he would say, bring the next one up to me and have her spend the night with me. And then he decided if he liked her, he might call her back again. Otherwise, she did get stuck to the house of the harem. And that's just where she is. And so when the turn of Esther, we see her, who her father is, Abihail. He was the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her for daughter. When she was come to go to the king, she required nothing but what Haggai, the king's chamberlain, the keeper of women, had appointed. So she didn't make requests, because like he said, all these women got the request of what they can bring, and she said, whatever Haggai's gonna do. So Esther obtained favor in the sight of all them that looked upon her. So Esther was taken into the king Ahasuerus into his house royal in the 10th month, which is the month Tebet, in the 7th year of his reign. And the king loved Esther above all the women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he had set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king made a great feast unto all his princes and servants, even Esther's feast. And he made a release to the provinces and gave gifts according to the state of the king. So he even made a great feast to honor his new wife, the queen, because these other women then became concubines, whereas he's taken Esther to wife to be his queen. We come in then from there about Mordecai learning about the king's own people looking to take him out. So he says, when the virgins were gathered together the second time, Mordecai sat in the king's gate, and Esther had not yet showed her kindred nor her people, as Mordecai had charged her. So she still wasn't telling her husband what her heritage was, her background as a Jew. And the reason that that the author of this book is saying this, because they're setting up for the great reveal, which is an important reveal later on once the decree is made to kill all the Jews, that she says, that's me. This decree you put out there is me. Do you want me dead? You know. So Esther did the commandment of Mordecai, like as when she was brought up with him. In those days, while Mordecai sat in the king's gate, two of the king's chamberlains, Bigthan and Teresh, of those who kept the door, were mad, and they sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. And the thing was known to Mordecai, who told it to Esther the queen, and Esther certified the king thereof in Mordecai's name. So Mordecai told her, she went and told the king and said, my cousin Mordecai told me this, and he heard it. He bears witness, and his testimony is true. And so when inquisition was made of the matter, it was found out, and therefore they were both hung on a tree, as it is written in the book of the Chronicles before the king. So this is recorded not in the book Chronicles of the Bible. This is the Chronicles there of Persia, of the kings of Persia, and so this story was written in there that there was a conspiracy from these chamberlains who wanted to kill the king. Mordecai reported to Queen Esther what was going to happen, and so this subterfuge, this plot to kill the king was thwarted, and these two men were put to death. And so this is recorded in the Chronicles. And then we're introduced into Haman. After these things did King Ahasuerus promote Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, and advanced him, and set a seat above the princes that were with him. Agagite. What is that reference to? You guys remember Agag? All right. There's quite possibility that this is reference to Agag, who was the king of the Amalekites, who Saul was supposed to slaughter them all, and he didn't. Remember, he saved the sheep that Samuel heard bleeding going bah, bah, not bleeding as in pouring blood, but making a sound. Hey, why am I here to bleed on the sheep? And he had King Agag there before him. This may very well be a descendant of Agag, who back then Agagites wanted to kill Israel, and now here's Agag hating on the Jews himself still. This Haman, the Agagite. So King Ahasuerus promoted Haman. He lifted him up then after this happened, set a seat above all the princes that were with him. And all the king's servants that were in the king's gate bowed and reverenced Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. So essentially he made like Haman his right-hand man. He was kind of like a Joseph of the kingdom. In fact, he gives him a signet ring and everything. So he said, everyone, you got to bow to him as you'd bow to me. And Mordecai wouldn't bow to Haman. He wouldn't give him reverence. And the king's servants, which were in the king's gate, said to Mordecai, hey, why are you breaking the king's commandment to bow? And it came to pass when they spoke daily with him, and he didn't listen to him, that they told Haman to see whether Mordecai's matters would stand, for he had told them that he was a Jew. So Mordecai's like, look, I'm a Jew. We don't bow to any man. We bow to God. And when Haman saw that Mordecai didn't bow and didn't give him reverence, Haman was mad. He was full of wrath, he says. And he thought scorn to lay hands upon Mordecai alone, for they had showed him the people of Mordecai. Wherefore Haman sought to destroy all the Jews that were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, even the people of Mordecai. So what this is saying is, he wasn't satisfied with just taking out Mordecai. He said, well, if Mordecai's excuse for not bowing to me is because he's a Jew, I'm going to take out all the Jews. Everyone in the kingdom. So that's what it means there. He thought, that's not enough. I need to take out these people. And in the first month, that is the month of Nisan, happening right now, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast pur, that is the lot, before Haman from day to day, and from month to month to the 12th month, that is the month Adar. So he's saying, when can we get this thing in play? I'm going to roll the dice. He cast pure, and it came up with him for Adar. So I'm gonna wipe these Jews out in the month of Adar. If you notice they're pure, that's where we get Purim, casting of lots. So Haman said to King Ahasuerus, there's a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed amongst the people in all the provinces of your kingdom, and their laws are diverse from all the people. Neither do they keep the king's laws. Therefore, it's not for the king's profit to allow them. So if it please the king, let it be written that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 of talents of silver to the hands of those that have the charge of this business to bring it to the king's treasuries. And the king took his ring from his hand, gave it to Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the Jews' enemy. And the king said unto Haman, the silver is given to you, the people also to do with it as it seems good to you. Then were the king's scribes called on the 13th day of the first month. There was written according to all that Haman had commanded to the king's lieutenants and to the governors that were over every province, to the rulers of every people of every province, according to the writing thereof, to every people after their language, in the name of King Ahasuerus, as it is written, and sealed with the king's ring. And letters were sent by post to all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to cause to perish all Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day, even upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar, and to take the spoil of them for prey. And the copy of the writing for the commandment to be given in every province was published unto all people, that they should be ready against that day. And the post went out, being hastened by the king's commandment. And the decree was given in Shushan, the palace, and the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Shushan was perplexed. So now here's this decree to go wipe them out, take them all out. Young to old, have no mercy, just wipe them out in a day, get rid of them. Because he says, these people are here, they're all over your kingdom in all these different provinces. Remember how wide his kingdom was. He goes, these people are there, and they don't care about your law. They have their own laws, which are different from us. Take them out. He isn't identifying necessarily who the people are directly here yet. I want these people taken out, because these people are in defiance of you, O king. We have no king but Caesar. He's in defiance of you, right? So Mordecai perceived all that was done, and Mordecai ripped his clothes. He rent his clothes, he put on sackcloth with ashes, and he went to into the midst of the city and cried with a loud and bitter cry, and came before the king's gate. He can only go there because no one can enter the king's gate who are clothed with sackcloth. And in every province, wheresoever the king's commandment and decree came, there was a great mourning amongst the Jews, and fasting and weeping and wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. And again, we see here's again some behind the scene things of God, at least in the sense of the people appealing to God, because fasting, what is fasting if it's just not unto God to seek his mercy? So we do see some workings here of the people seeking his face. And sackcloth and ashes, and so Esther's maids and her chamberlains came, and they told her about Mordecai, and the queen was exceedingly grieved, and she sent clothing to clothe Mordecai to take away his sackcloth from him, but he wouldn't receive it. And Esther called for Hoeck, one of the king's chamberlains, whom he appointed to attend to her, and gave him a commandment to Mordecai to know what it was and why it was. And so Hoeck went forth to Mordecai under the street of the city, which was before the king's gate. And Mordecai told him all that happened unto him, and of the sum of money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasuries for the Jews to destroy him. And then he gave a copy of the writing of the decree that was given at Shushan to destroy them, to show it to Esther and to declare it unto her, and to charge her that she should go unto the king to make supplication to him and to make request before him for her people. So Esther didn't know about this decree that went out with the king's ring from Haman getting out there. So Mordecai's Here's why I'm weeping. Here's why I refuse to be dressed in that clothes. I'm in sackcloth and ashes, because your husband has essentially sealed our death. He sent it out everywhere. Here's a copy of the decree. You need to go talk to your husband, because this is what Haman did. Haman has fooled your husband. Go talk to him. Get this straightened out. Make supplication to him. And so Hathach came and told Esther the words of Mordecai. Again, Esther spoke unto Hathach and gave him a commandment to Mordecai, and all the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that whosoever, whether man or woman, shall come to the king in the inner court who is not called, there is one law of his, to put him to death, except to whom the king shall hold out the golden scepter, that he may live. But I have not been called to come into the king these 30 days. It's like, I've been sitting here. He's not even called me in to be with him. It's been a month since I've seen him. And you're asking me to go in there, knowing the decree, knowing the law of the Medes and Persians says anyone who enters in there is put to death. And they told this to Mordecai, Esther's words, and Mordecai commanded to answer Esther, said, do you think, right back to the key verse, do you think that it's going to be any better for you in the king's house? That you're going to escape this? More than all the rest of the Jews? If you altogether hold your peace, if you don't say anything to your husband, then shall be an enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. So here again, we see Mordecai says, if you don't do this, if you're not there, you're not using this place where God has raised you to be in a position to talk to the king loves you and desires you. If you're not there doing that, God will from another place rise up to save us. He doesn't say God, but he says it's going to happen. There's going to be another way, but realize you're going to be dead, you and your house. And he says, who knows whether you'll come to the kingdom for such a time as this? So Esther bade them to return to Mordecai this answer, said, all right, go together all the Jews that are present in Shushan and fast for me. Don't eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maidens also will fast likewise, and then will I go in unto the king, which is not according to the law, and if I die, I die. So Mordecai went his way and did all according to all that Esther had commanded them. So this is great to see Esther step out in faith and, emboldened a bit from Mordecai, and really given the sense of, look, if you don't do this, you're going to die anyways because you're a Jew. So even if he doesn't extend his scepter to you, we need him to extend his scepter unto all of us, essentially. We need his decree changed up, as it were. So Mordecai makes his request, and Esther steps up. It came to pass on the third day that, because remember, she fasted for 3 days, night and day. So it came to pass on that third day that Esther put on her royal apparel and stood in the inner court of the king's house, over against the king's house. And the king sat upon his royal throne in the royal house, over against the gate of the house. And it was so that when the king saw Esther, the queen, standing in the court, that she obtained favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. And Esther drew near and touched the top of the scepter. Then said the king unto her, what is it you want, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given unto you, even to half the kingdom. And Esther answered, said, if it seem good unto the king, let the king and Haman come this day unto the banquet that I have prepared for him. And the king said, cause Haman to make haste, that he may do as Esther has said. So the king and Haman came to the banquet that Esther had prepared. And the king said to Esther at the banquet of wine, so what is your petition? It should be granted to you. And what is your request? Even to half the kingdom, it'll be performed. Then answered Esther and said, my petition and my request is that if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it please the king to grant my petition and to perform my request, let the king and Haman come to the banquet that I shall prepare for them, and I will do tomorrow, as the king has said. So remember, the story began with 2 banquets from the king, the 6-month banquet and then the 7-day banquet. And now so Esther's inviting him to 2 banquets. You're at the one, come again tomorrow. I'm going to make another banquet for you and Haman. And I will let you know then what it is that's in my heart. So while she's stepping up, Haman's puffing up. So Haman went forth that day joyful and with a glad heart. When Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he didn't stand up nor move from him, he was full of indignation against Mordecai. So he was happy because he says, even the queen is setting me apart here. I'm at a special dinner with the 2 of them, king and queen, and she requested me to be there. So he's all puffed up in himself, and then he's walking off all happy, and then he sees Mordecai, and then he's mad, The guy won't bow down to me. Nevertheless, Haman refrained himself, and when he went home, he sent and he called for his friends and Zeresh, his wife, and Haman told them of the glory of his riches and the multitude of his children and all things wherein the king had promoted him, and that how he had advanced him above the princes and the servants of the king. And Haman said, moreover, yea, Esther the queen didn't let anyone come in with the king to the banquet that she prepared but me. She made a special thing for her husband, and no one else got to go but me. I'm special. I mean, look at all these glory I have. Look at where he's already put me. Look at my children that I blessed with. He has 10 sons, and I got all this, and now Esther's exalted me as well. And said, tomorrow I'm invited with her also with the king. Again, I get to go for another one. Yet all this avails me nothing as long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. Yeah. Then said Zeresh his wife and all his friends unto him, let a gallows be made of 50 cubits high, and tomorrow speak to the king that Mordecai may be hanged thereon. Then you can go in merrily with the king unto the banquet. And if this thing pleased Haman, and he caused the gallows to be made. Now the tables turn. So on that night, could not the king sleep? And he commanded to bring the book of the records of Chronicles, and they were read before the king. So here again, if we're having eyes to see, here's God working behind the scenes. We often see things of what's happening, like we see it in the Gospels, like with Pontius Pilate's wife. Hey, I saw this man in the dream. These things where people's hearts are troubled. And so here on this very night, while Haman's at home preparing gallows to ask the king to kill Mordecai, he's laying there sleepless. And he's asked, hey, come read to me. Read me some stuff out of the Chronicles so I can just fall asleep to that. And it was found written in there that Mordecai had told of Bigthana and Teresh, 2 of the king's chamberlains, the keepers of the door, that had sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. And the king said, well, what honor and dignity was done to Mordecai for this? And the king's servants that ministered to him said, nothing was done for him. And what a coincidence that he happens to be right at this spot in the records. And the king said, well, who's in the court? Well, Haman happened to be in the court of the king. He was up there in the outward court. And he was there wanting to speak to the king to hang Mordecai on the gallows. So he's there in the court. Coincidence? So the king's servant said to him, behold, Haman's standing in the court. And the king said, well, let him come in. So Haman came in, and the king said to him, hey, what shall be done to the man who the king delights to honor? And Haman thought in his heart, to whom would the king delight to honor more than me? And Haman thought, Haman answered the king and said, for the man whom the king delights to honor, let the royal apparel be brought, which the king uses to wear, and the horse the king rides upon, and the crown royal that's set upon his head. and let this apparel and horse be delivered to the hand of the one of the king's most noble princes, that they may array the man whom the king delights to honor, and bring him on horseback through the whole street of the city, and proclaim before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. So the king said to Haman, you know what? Get at it. Make haste. Take the apparel and the horse, as you've said, and do so to Mordecai, the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Let nothing fail of everything that you spoke. So took Haman the apparel and the horse, and arrayed Mordecai, and brought him on horseback through the street of the city, and proclaimed before him, thus shall be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. And Mordecai came again to the king's gate, but Haman hasted to his house mourning, and having his head covered. And Haman told Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends everything that had befallen him. Then said his wise men and Zeresh, his wife, to him, if Mordecai be of the seed of the Jews, before whom you have begun to fall, you shall not prevail against him. You shall surely fall before him. So his wife and his wise men are saying, you're coming after God's people. And you're seeing yourself fall now and them exalted. Guess what's waiting for you? And so while they were yet talking with him, came the king's chamberlains and hasted to bring Haman to the banquet number 2 that Esther prepared. So Haman's plot gets uncovered here. The king and Haman came to the banquet with Esther the queen, and the king said unto Esther on the second day at the banquet of wine, so what is your petition, Queen Esther? It should be granted you. What is your request? It should be performed, even to half the kingdom. And Esther the queen answered and said, if I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be given me at my position, and my people at my request. For we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, to perish. Now, if we had just been sold to be bondsmen and bondwomen, I would have held my tongue, although an enemy could not countervail the king's damage. Then the king Ahasuerus answered and said unto Esther the queen, who is he? Where is he that has durst presume in his heart to do this? And Esther said, the adversary and the enemy is this wicked Haman. And Haman was afraid before the king and the queen. And the king, arising from the banquet of wine, in his wrath went to the palace garden. And Haman stood up to make request for his life to Queen Esther. He saw there was evil determined against him by the king. He knew the king was torqued, and the king had to walk off. And so now he's ready to beg Esther now for his life. And so he comes near to her, and so the king comes back from out of the palace garden into the palace of the banquet of wine, and he sees Haman falling upon the bed where Esther was on. Like, he's begging at Esther's feet, like, oh, and now the king's even more torqued. He's like, are you going to force the queen also before me? You're going to rape my wife? What are you doing? And so he's torqued. And as the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. And Harbona, one of the chamberlains, said before the king, behold also the gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman had made for Mordecai, who had spoken good for the king, is standing in the house of Haman. So the king said, you hang him on it. And so they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. And thus was the king's wrath pacified. On that day did King Ahasuerus give the house of Haman, the Jew's enemy, unto Esther the queen. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was unto her. So she said, Mordecai's my family. He's the one who raised me. He acted as my father. And so she finally reveals what Mordecai had forbid her to reveal before. Hey, Mordecai's my fam. And the king took off his ring, and which he took from Haman, and he gave it to Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. And Esther spoke again before the king and fell down on his feet and besought him with tears to put away the mischief of Haman the Agagite in his device that he had devised against the Jews, this decree that went out that they're all going to get killed on Adar 13. And the king held out his golden scepter to Esther. And so Esther arose and stood before the king and said, if it please the king, and if I found favor in his sight, the thing seems right before the king, and I be pleased in his eyes, let it be written to reverse the letters devised by Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews which are in all the king's provinces. How can I endure to see the evil that shall come to my people? How can I endure to see the destruction of my kindred? Then King Ahasuerus said to Esther the queen and to Mordecai the Jew, said, behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, the house of Haman, and him they have hanged upon the gallows because he laid his hand upon the Jews. So you write also for the Jews as it likes you to the king's name and seal it with the king's ring. For the writing which is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's rings may no man reverse. It says, I can't undo what happened from Haman, but I can issue a new decree. And it says, write this thing up. I gave you the ring. Go ahead, seal it, get this thing published. And it says, the king's scribes were called at the time in the 3rd month, was the month Sivan, on the 23rd day thereof. And it was written according to all that Mordecai commanded unto the Jews, and to the lieutenants and the deputies and the rulers of the provinces, which was from India unto Ethiopia, 127 provinces, unto every province according to the writing thereof, unto every people after their language, to the Jews according to their writing, according to their language. He wrote in King Ahasuerus' name, sealed it with the king's ring, and sent letters by post on horseback, and riders on mules and camels and young dromedaries, wherein the king granted the Jews which were in every city to gather themselves together and to stand for their lives, to destroy, to slay, and to cause to perish all the power of the people and the province that would assault them, both little ones and women, and to take the spoil of them for a prey upon one day in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, namely upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. So he says, now basically everything I told the other people, how they were to come in or Haman said that they're come in, he can slay you and take all your stuff, your homes and your goods. You people have the same right to make a stand, to fight, take them, and you can take their homes and their stuff if they come against you. So the copy of the writing for the commandment as to be given to every province was published into all the people, so the Jews should be ready against that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. So the posts that rode upon mules and camels went out, being hastened to press upon by the king's commandment, and decree was given at Shushan the palace. And Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal apparel of blue and white, and with a great crown of gold, and with a garment of fine linen and purple. And the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad, and the Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor. And in every province and in every city, wheresoever the king's commandment and his decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a good day, and many of the people of the land became Jews, for the fear of the Jews fell upon them. So was this a matter of people wanting to worship Yehovah, or was it a matter of people looking to preserve their life? Wait a second, now these Jews have the right to make war and avenge. I'm going to join them. So they became Jews, so they wouldn't be one of the ones being taken out. You know, this isn't like a matter of a bunch of Ruths, as it were. Yeah. Looking for salvation, not to serve. So in the 12th month, this leads into now the story of Purim, how the Jews celebrate their victories and how they were saved from Haman's decree. In the 12th month, that is the month Adar, on the 13th day of the same, when the king's commandment and his decree drew near to be put out in execution, in the day when the enemies of the Jews hoped to have power over them, though it was turned to the contrary, tables were turned, once again, that the Jews had their rule over them that hated them. And the Jews gathered themselves together in their cities throughout all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus to lay hand on such as sought their hurt, and no man could withstand them, for the fear of them fell upon all people, and all the rulers of the provinces and the lieutenants and deputies and officers of the king helped the Jews, because of the fear of Mordecai fell upon them. For Mordecai was great in the king's house, and his fame went out through all the provinces. For this man Mordecai waxed greater and greater. I see Mordecai kind of like an echo of Joseph, as it were, this man who gets exalted. And again, a better man than you. Haman falling out, and Mordecai being raised up. It's interesting though too, because he's a Benjamite of Kish, as we see of Saul. So Mordecai was great in the king's house, and his fame went through all the provinces. This man Mordecai waxed greater and greater. Thus the Jews smote all their enemies with the stroke of the sword, and slaughter and destruction, and did what they would to those that hated them. And in Shushan, the palace, the Jews slew and destroyed 500 men. In Parshandatha, and Dalphon, and Ashpatha, and Poratha, and Aldalia, and Iridatha, and Parmashta, and Erasai, and Iradai, and Vayesatha, the 10 sons of Haman, the son of Hamadatha, the enemy of the Jews, they slew. But on the spoil they didn't lay their hands. On that day, the number of those that were slain in Shushan the palace was brought before the king. And the king said to Esther the queen, the Jews have slain and destroyed 500 men in Shushan the palace, and the 10 sons of Haman. What have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now what is your petition? And it should be granted you. What is your request further? And it should be done. Then said Esther, if it please the king, let it be granted the Jews which are in Shushan to do tomorrow, according to today's decree. This is why Purim is 2 days, 13th and 14th. So he said, don't let it stop now. Let it do it again tomorrow. And the king said, let it be done. She said, let it be done, and let Haman's 10 sons be hanged on the gallows. So the king commanded it, and the decree was given at Shushan, and they hanged Haman's 10 sons. For the Jews were in Shushan, gathered themselves together on the 14th day also of the month of Adar, and they slew 300 men at Shushan, but on the prey they didn't lay their hand. And the other Jews that were in the king's provinces gathered themselves together and stood for their lives, and had rest from their enemies, and slew of their foes 75,000. But they didn't lay hands on their prey. So these people weren't coming up and taking the homes and the stuff of the people they killed. On the 13th day of 14th day, the same, and they made it a day of feasting and gladness. But the Jews that were in Shushan assembled together on the 13th day and on the 14th day, and on the 15th day of the same they rested, and they made it a day of feasting and gladness. Therefore the Jews of the villages that dwelt in the unwalled towns made the 14th day of Adar a day of gladness and feasting, and a good day, and of sending portions to one another. And Mordecai wrote these things and sent letters to all the Jews that were in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, both near and far, to establish this among them, that they should keep the 14th day of the month of Adar and the 15th day of the month of the same month yearly, as the days wherein the Jews rested from their enemies, in the month which was turned from them from sorrow to joy, from mourning to a good day, that they should make days of feastings, and joy, and of sending portions one to another, in gifts to the poor. And the Jews undertook it to do as they had begun, as Mordecai had written unto them. Because Haman, the son of Hamadatha, the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had devised against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast pur, that is, the lot, to consume them, and to destroy them. But when Esther came before the king, he commanded by letters that his wicked device, which he had devised against the Jews, should turn upon his own head, and that he and his son should be hanged on the gallows. Wherefore they call these days Purim, after the name of Pur. Therefore, all the words of this letter, and of that which they had seen concerning this matter, which had come unto them, the Jews ordained and took upon them, and upon their seed, and upon all that had joined themselves unto them, so as it should not fail, that they would keep these 2 days according to their writing, and according to their appointed time every year, and that these days should be remembered and kept throughout every generation, every family, every province, every city, that these days of Purim should not fall or fail from among the Jews, nor the memorial of them perish from their seed. And Esther the queen, the daughter of Abihail, and Mordecai the Jew, ruled with all authority to confirm the second letter of Purim, And he sent the letters to all the Jews to the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus with words of peace and truth, to confirm these days of Purim and their times appointed, according as Mordecai the Jew and Esther the queen had enjoined them, and as they had decreed for themselves and for their seed. In the matters of their fastings and their cry, the decree of Esther confirmed these matters of Purim, for it was written in the book. And the book closes with just a couple sentences about Mordecai. King Ahasuerus laid a tribute upon the land and upon the isles of the sea, and all the acts of his power and his might, and the declarations of the greatness of Mordecai, whereunto the king advanced him. Are they not written in the book of the chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? Mordecai the Jew was next unto King Ahasuerus, and great among the Jews, and accepted of the multitude of his brethren, seeking the wealth of his people, and speaking peace unto all his seed. All right. Thus closes the book of Esther. As I said, you see God's work. This is these are people who were of the diaspora. Mordecai himself is one of the ones sent out during the time when Jehoiakim was taken captive with the people, and they brought to Babylon. Here are people, though a wave of people under the decree of Cyrus had started to return back to the land, coming in under Zerubbabel. These people here remained in the province of Persia under the people of Cyrus's empire, as it were, and they didn't return to Jerusalem with Zerubbabel and all of them, or later under the wave under Ezra. But God was still working with these people, though God is not mentioned. We see his hand in this. We see his hand in this world in the same way with people who may not acknowledge God, but God is providing for people all the time. We know all the kings, people who are exalted in this world, are there at God's decree. The king will raise up who he raises up. Our king will raise up who he raises up and bring down who he brings down, both empires and people in positions. So this book of Esther, I think, is a good reminder of that though God is not outright acknowledged, doesn't mean God is not there, and God is not operating, and God is not doing things for his good pleasure and for the sake of his people whom he loves. All right. So that's it for today. We'll be back with the Feast of Unleavened Bread.